They thought you'd break quietly. They never imagined you'd rise calm, strategic, untouchable. You stopped reacting. You stopped explaining. And just like that, their power vanished. This isn't about revenge. It's about resurrection. You didn't just survive their game, you mastered it. They handed you a rulebook. One written in manipulation, coated in guilt, and enforced with fear. You followed it at first. You played by the rules they never intended to honor themselves. But somewhere along the line, something shifted. You stopped being the pawn. You became the strategist. And that's what burns them the most. It's not that you lied, cheated, or hurt them. It's that you saw through the blueprint they used to control you. And you outgrew it. When you stopped reacting, they lost their grip. When you stopped explaining yourself, they lost their access. When you stopped needing them to feel whole, they lost their relevance in your life. What they never anticipated was this: that silence could be your sharpest weapon. That pain would become your fuel. That your boundaries once mocked would become the walls they could no longer penetrate. This video isn't about payback. It's about your personal evolution. You didn't sink to their level. You rose above. And now they're forced to witness a version of you they never prepared for. Let's break it down. Why they're furious. And why their rage is actually confirmation that you've already won. You see, they never wanted fairness. They didn't teach you the rules so you could win. They taught you obedience, not truth, control, not connection. You were supposed to lose quietly, to apologize for having needs, to over-explain your boundaries like you owed them permission for existing. They handed you invisible expectations. Be nice, even when disrespected. Be silent, even when it hurts. Be forgiving, even when they feel no remorse. But here's what they never saw coming: the day you realized the whole system was rigged. The moment you refused to keep showing up with open arms to people who only ever brought hidden knives. That's when the shift happened. You stopped mistaking loyalty for self-abandonment. You stopped chasing peace that required your silence. And instead of asking how to fit into their world, you started asking questions that shook the foundation of everything. Why am I always the one to bend? Why is peace only present when I disappear? Why do I feel guilt for protecting my mental health? And once those questions lit the fire of clarity, there was no going back. You stopped betraying yourself. They didn't love you. They loved your compliance. And when you stopped playing the character they cast you as, they rewrote the script. Suddenly, you're the problem. Suddenly, you've changed. Suddenly, you're the villain in the story where they were always the victim. But here's the truth they can't silence. You didn't betray them. You finally chose not to betray yourself. That is self-respect. That is growth. Now, emotional intelligence is your armor. You're no longer swayed by emotional manipulation. You've become dangerous not because you attack, but because they can no longer provoke the old version of you, the one who used to beg, over-explain, and crumble under pressure. Now, they're staring at someone they don't recognize. Someone who watches instead of reacts. Someone who doesn't flinch at chaos, but stands firm in calm. And that version of you is exactly what they feared you'd become. You see, when you stopped reacting and started observing, everything changed. That quiet version of youth, the one they underestimated, became your greatest strength. You're no longer someone who explodes under pressure. You've become someone who responds with presence, not panic. Someone who walks away from the fire. Instead of dancing in the flames, your calmness has become your superpower. Your silence, once mistaken for weakness, is now a strategy, a signal, a boundary. a fortress they simply can't enter, because the moment you stopped feeling guilty, they lost their favorite weapon. For manipulators and narcissists, guilt is their currency. If they can make you feel guilty, they don't have to change. They don't have to apologize. They don't have to grow. All they have to do is twist the narrative, flip the script, and make you the problem. But not anymore. You've rewired your entire mindset. You've learned to pause before reacting, to breathe instead of explode, to ask yourself the one question that shatters manipulation: is this truly my responsibility, or just their projection? And the moment guilt stops working, when they can no longer weaponize your empathy, they panic, not because they love you, but because they miss the control they once held over you. Boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. And once you stop playing their emotional games, a truth emerges. Boundaries aren't punishments, they're clarity. They reveal everything. Who's there to connect, and who was only there to control. The ones who love you, they respect your limits, they honor your space. But the ones who used you, they resent it. They call you cold, distant, selfish. But that resentment, it's not proof you've gone too far. It's proof you finally told the truth without apology. You say no without You stop giving access to people who drain your spirit. You no longer defend yourself against chaos. You detach, and in doing so, you don't just protect your peace, you transform the entire dynamic. Because now, they're not the puppeteer anymore. You've cut the strings, and suddenly, they're spiraling. They don't hate you because you changed. They hate that you changed first, because now, they're exposed. Without your agreement, their lies echo louder. Without your submission, their ego can't stand upright. Without your presence, their illusion collapses completely. You've outgrown the old game, the one they designed to define you, contain you, shrink you. Now, they're left playing alone, because you're not even on the field anymore. You're not chasing revenge. You're not trying to prove your point. You're simply living on your own terms, with your clarity, your peace, and your emotional freedom intact. And that's more powerful, more unsettling, more humiliating than any revenge could ever be. Silence, you see, isn't the absence of words. It's the presence of power. When you stop explaining yourself, they feel it. When you stop arguing, they notice. When you stop reacting, they panic because your silence, it speaks the truth your words never could. Could I have outgrown this chaos? Yes, you did. And your silence confirms it, because silence breaks the cycle. Every toxic dynamic is fueled by one thing: your engagement. You defend yourself when they twist your words. You protest when they gaslight you. You explain, hoping they'll finally get it. But that's the trap, because the moment you react, they win, not because they're right, but because they've dragged you back into their chaos, where they feel most powerful. But when you go silent, you shatter the loop. You stop feeding the fire. You stop performing in the play they've written. And now they're left alone. Alone with their manipulation, their games, their truth. No more distractions, no more projections. Just them and the mirror they've been running from. That's what terrifies them. They were prepared for rage, for tears, for begging, because that is what kept the cycle going. But when you meet their chaos with complete stillness, no text, no call, no reaction, they panic. Why? Because now they have no script. They can't manipulate what they can't predict. They can't twist what they can't read. And for the first time ever, they're forced to face exactly who they are without your energy, to shield them from it. Why? Because when you stop reacting, you become unpredictable. And to a person addicted to control, unpredictability means a loss of power. You're no longer playing by the rules they set. In fact, you've left the game entirely, taking all your power with you. Your silence is no longer avoidance, it's emotional. Intelligence at its highest level. It takes inner strength, not weakness, not fear, but clarity, awareness, and decisiveness. You no longer need to be understood, no longer need validation, no longer need to prove anything to anyone. And that silence becomes a form of self-mastery, because when you know your worth, you don't negotiate it. You don't beg for basic respect. You don't argue with chaos. You simply walk away. No drama, no noise. Just a quiet, steady exit strong. Enough to shake their entire world. Your silence becomes a mirror. What they fear most is not your anger, but your indifference. Because indifference quietly says, you no longer have a place in my world, and that hurts more than any insult. It reflects the truth they've tried so hard to avoid, that they no longer matter, that their games no longer work, that they never had the power they thought they did. Your silence forces them to face a bitter reality. They are no longer a part of your life, and for someone addicted to control, that is the ultimate wound. You are practicing a deep spiritual discipline, one that looks like detachment. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Seneca, when you pull away, not with resentment, but with resolve, you're not punishing them, you're protecting your peace. Because once you've healed, you no longer seek closure from something that was always unclear. You don't wait for apologies from those who used your compassion against you. You simply choose the truth and walk away. They'll say you've changed. They'll call you cold. And they're right, you have changed. From a people pleaser to a protector. From a reactor to an observer. From a pawn in their game to the one who left the board. Your silence is no longer empty space. It's a declaration. I no longer dance for those who watched me fall. You've risen above the chaos. You've chosen peace over performance. And you've learned one of the greatest truths of Stoicism. Power isn't loud. It's the ability to walk away without saying a word. And here's the harsh truth. Your evolution doesn't hurt them. It exposes them. You didn't attack them. You became a mirror. And that's what enraged them. Because now, when they stand in front of you, they see everything they tried to bury. Their insecurity, their lack of growth, their emotional immaturity didn't trigger their pain. You triggered their awareness of it. And that is the root of their hatred. Psychological projection, Carl Jung once said. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the truth is, most people aren't ready to face that level of emotional maturity. So instead of looking inward, they lash outward. Instead of taking responsibility, they blame. You're called arrogant just because you're confident. You're called selfish just because you stopped people pleasing. You're called cold just because you set clear boundaries. But none of that was ever about you. It's always been about them. They're not reacting to your growth. They're reacting to the truth your growth reveals. Your evolution tears down the illusions they built to survive. Because once you've healed, once you no longer play the same role in their story, you don't just change your own life, you disrupt theirs. Why? Because now, the lies they once told themselves about you no longer work. Now, you're the calmest presence in every room you enter. You used to be the one they called too sensitives, the weak link. But today, you walk with a quiet strength that doesn't need to announce itself. You used to be dependent, always reaching, always explaining. Now, you thrive in solitude, grounded, whole, and unapologetically complete. And that shift, it shakes their world. Because their entire narrative was built around a version of you that no longer exists. And when that version disappears, their illusion crumbles. That kind of exposure, it burns. Why? Because now, they're faced with a choice. Evolve to meet you at your new level, or tear you down to feel tall again. Take a guess which one most people choose. Boundaries are mirrors. They reflect everything the other person can't or won't do. When you draw a line, you're not just protecting your peace, you're also revealing the limits of others. Your no reminds them of all the moments they should have said no to. Your serenity highlights the chaos they still carry inside. Your discipline exposes their dysfunction, and they can't look away. You've stopped leaking your energy to prove your worth. You've stopped over-explaining, stopped justifying, stopped pleading to be understood. And now, for the first time, they're forced to face the truth. You never needed them. They needed your confusion to stay relevant. But you're no longer confused. You're clear, and clarity is something they can't manipulate. So what do? They twist your growth into betrayal. That's the tragedy to those who only loved you for the role you played. Your evolution feels like abandonment. You used to be predictable, safe, easy to control. Now, you're self-respecting, grounded, unapologetically authentic. And that scares them, so they flip the script. You've changed. You think you're better. You left us behind. But the truth, you didn't change to be superior. You changed to survive. You chose self-worth over guilt, emotional intelligence over emotional labor, inner peace over external approval. And anyone who couldn't celebrate that was never truly for you. Their discomfort, it's not yours to carry. Let that sink in. It's not your job to soften the blow of your growth for those unwilling to grow. You don't owe them the old version of you. You don't owe them the comfort of your self-betrayal. Your healing is not an apology. Your peace is not up for negotiation. And if your light makes them squint, that's their work to do, not yours. Because here's the truth. You are living proof that healing is possible. And to those who have spent their lives avoiding their own healing, that is terrifying. But never dim your light just to protect someone else's shadow. Because your clarity, your strength, your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is exactly what this world needs. More of. They weren't ready for this version of you. They created the game. They wrote the rules. They stacked the deck. But you played it better. Not by cheating, not by manipulating, but by mastering the one thing they never could call in self-control. They thrived on predictability. You became unreadable. See, toxic people depend on patterns. They provoke, you react. They guilt, you explain. They manipulate, you comply. That was the game. And for a while, it worked. Because you were still emotionally entangled. Still hoping for peace from people who only fed on chaos. But the day you stopped reacting, the day you stopped justifying, stopped explaining, stopped seeking their validation, was the day the entire strategy collapsed. Your silence, it wasn't weakness, it was precision. You turned emotional intelligence into a kind of weapon, not to harm, but to protect. They expected shouting. You gave them calm. They expected breakdowns. You gave them stillness. And in that stillness, they met their match. Your emotional discipline became their greatest threat. Because here's the final truth. They only know how to control people through emotional chaos. And when you stopped dancing in their storm, the game ended. Because when your mind becomes as still as a mountain, you become untouchable. That is the essence of silent confidence, louder than any argument could ever be. You've mastered the Stoic game. You respond, not react. The ancient Stoics always taught, it's not what happens to you that matters, but how you choose to face it. Epictetus said it long ago, and now you're living it. They used to feed off your emotional reactions, your outbursts, your desperate pleas, your lack of control. But now, you respond with calm and intention. They try to guilt you. You observe, unmoved. They try to trap you with vague, manipulative words. You smile and walk away. They try to drag you into chaos with divide and conquer tactics. You reject the role entirely and exit the story. You've stepped into an inner game while they're still trapped in childish emotional warfare, and that infuriates them more than anything. You no longer accept the role of the victim, nor do you accept the role of the villain. You reject both roles they once forced onto you, the one to pity and manipulate, or the one to blame and attack. Instead, you redefine yourself clearly, unapologetically, and without needing anyone's approval. You're not seeking revenge. You're focused on becoming your highest self. And that alone is enough to make them lose control. Because now, they can't predict your next move. They can't reach your emotions. They no longer have the power to rewrite your story. They lost their grip the moment you stopped explaining yourself. That is the power of intentional detachment. And let's be clear, detachment isn't bitterness. It's strategy you've learned. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every accusation deserves a response. Not every relationship is meant to be saved. You don't fight to be right. You live to be real. And that kind of power, come focused and unshakable, can't be bought. Can't be manipulated. It can only be earned through self-mastery. That's why they're angry. Because you won without playing dirty. They expected a war, but you gave them a funeral for the version of you they once controlled. And the parts they hate most. You didn't scream, you didn't argue, you didn't beg. You simply outgrew the game and walked away from the table in silence. That wasn't just a victory. That was mastery, a kind of power built in silence. You're no longer the person they used to remember. You've become the version they never saw coming. And by the time they realize it, it's already too late. What truly enrages them isn't that you refuse to forgive. It's that you no longer give them access. Forgiveness, to them, was never genuine. It was just another tactic, a way to reset the game, wipe the slate clean, and start over. But always on their terms, only. This time, you didn't press reset. You set boundaries. You stopped explaining. You refused to keep playing the role of the endlessly forgiving, endlessly tolerant, ever-available doormat. And that's what made you dangerous. Because now, you're no longer easy to manipulate. True peace isn't passive. It's a conscious choice. It's time to redefine what inner peace really means. Peace doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing not to carry their chaos into your future. You don't have to hate them. You don't even have to think about them anymore. But you do have to protect yourself. And that's not revenge. That's spiritual discipline. As Marcus Aurelius once said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. It's not about blind forgiveness. It's about living so powerfully that their existence becomes irrelevant. That is peace. And peace requires boundaries, emotional intelligence, means knowing when to close the door. Forgiveness is a gift, but only when it's deserved. If someone repeatedly betrays your trust, mocks your pain, and refuses to change, then forgiving them isn't noble, it's naive. You've outgrown that cycle. You've stopped trying to heal others while bleeding out yourself. You're no longer afraid of being seen as cold, because now you understand kindness doesn't mean being available. You can still love from a distance. You can wish them well and still walk away. Not forgiving is sometimes the highest form of self-respect. When you say no more, when you stop letting them twist the narrative, when you realize that not everyone deserves a second chance, you're not being cruel. You're honoring yourself at the highest level. Forgiveness is not always the light. Sometimes the true light is in never going back. And that's what they'll never understand, because their power always relied on your guilt. Now that you're awake, they can no longer manipulate you through morality. They can't weaponize your empathy. You've stopped seeking closure from those who feed on open wounds. The final truth: you didn't stop forgiving because you were angry. You stopped because you were done. Done with cycles. Done with excuses. Done confusing emotional intelligence with self-erasure. You've awakened. You've chosen self-worth over reconciliation, peace over proximity, clarity over chaos. And that choice, it isn't heartless, it's sacred. You didn't lose your compassion, you simply gave it to the right person, yourself. They thought you'd always be there, always explaining, always tolerating, always fixing the damage they refused to acknowledge. But then, you did the one thing they never expected. You disappeared. No warning, no goodbye, no dramatic exit, just silence. You removed yourself without permission, and that is what shattered them. Toxic people operate under a single illusion that they own access to you, that no matter how many times they lie, insult, or betray, you'll come back. They mistook your compassion for weakness, your patience for permission. So when you finally walked away, no announcement, no explanation, it wasn't just the silence that broke them, it was the lack of closure. Because now, they no longer control the story. Your absence is a boundary they cannot manipulate. They once fed off your reactions. Now, your calm detachment starves them. You're no longer chasing to be understood by people who never really listened in the first place. You've outgrown the need for their validation. And in doing so, you reclaimed your peace. They thought your silence was weakness. But now they realize it was your awakening. That's the essence of true emotional intelligence. Choosing to protect your energy, even if it means walking away, without saying a word. Not out of fear, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. They once thrived in chaos, didn't they? Thrived on the drama, the confusion, the emotional tug-of-war. But now, all they're left with is the deafening echo of their own emptiness. And that silence, it terrifies them. You didn't ghost them. You healed without them. You didn't vanish because you were weak. You vanished because you finally understood. You were bleeding for people who only ever brought knives. This wasn't silence as revenge. It was silence as survival, as recovery, as rebirth. You came to a painful but powerful realization. You were never going to get closure from someone who gained everything from your confusion. So instead of chasing peace, you became it. You stopped begging to be heard, and you became the calm after the storm, unafraid, unmoved, unbothered. Now they're left in the ruins of a war they started alone. No one left to fight, just echoes and ashes. They feel the void, but blame your boundaries. Here's the paradox. They miss you, but they don't miss loving you. They miss controlling you. And when they finally realize you're no longer reachable, that your thoughts don't orbit around them anymore, that your heart has stopped seeking their validation, that's when they start to unravel, because they didn't just lose a person, they lost their supply, the mirror that once reflected their illusion back at them, the presence that made their dysfunction feel normal. Now all that remains is themselves, and that is their worst nightmare. The collapse begins when they finally understand you're not coming back. No message, no apology, no door left open. They wait, and days turn into silence. And that silence slowly curdles into shame. But here's the truth they can't admit. They're not mourning your absence. They're panicking over their exposure. Because your disappearance did what no confrontation ever could. It revealed them to themselves, to others, to the mirror, and what they saw, they can't unsee. That's the sharpest kind of revenge. You walked away quietly, and they began falling apart loudly. What they never anticipated was your inner power. They thought their game had broken you, but all along it was building. You learned how to guard your peace like a fortress, how to rebuild without an audience, how to find clarity in solitude. Your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. They expected noise. You gave them dignified distance, and now they're not just angry, they're powerless, because the strongest weapon you ever used was your absence. They were always betting on the old. You, the one who over-apologized, who over-explained, who gave chance after chance after chance. They built their manipulation around your kindness, your empathy, your fear of disappointing people. But then, something shifted. You stopped breaking. You stopped justifying. You stopped letting their dysfunction dictate your identity. And now, they're lost. Because the old version of you, the one they knew how to manipulate, no longer exists. You've outgrown it. You evolved beyond the script they wrote for you. You destroyed the blueprint they used to keep you small. And they don't recognize this new version of you. The one who holds strong psychological boundaries without guilt. The one who says no and doesn't need to explain why. The one who chooses self-respect over approval. You're no longer emotionally available to chaos. No longer hooked on toxic patterns. No longer handing out access like it costs nothing. You've changed, not out of spite, but out of strength. They tried to provoke you, but you responded with calm. They tried to guilt you, but you answered with silence. That is emotional intelligence in action. And to them, that's terrifying. They're still playing the same old tricks, silent treatments, subtle pressure, backhanded compliments, triangulation, but none of it works anymore. Why? Because you're not playing the game. Not anymore. You've leveled up, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They're still stuck playing psychological checkers, while you've moved on to mastering Stoic chess. You don't react. You observe. You choose stillness over noise, dignity over drama. And that, more than anything, is what breaks them. Your indifference. Your power, born from self-reinvention. This is what they never saw coming. You didn't seek revenge. You chose rebirth. When you began rebuilding, it wasn't just your words or appearance that changed. It was your entire mindset. You installed filters around your energy. You deleted the programming that taught you to shrink. You rejected the guilt they used to control you. And in doing so, you became uncontrollable. You found inner peace, not because they changed, but because you did. You stopped waiting for apologies. You stopped needing their validation. You stopped justifying your healing. This is what real spiritual discipline looks like. Choosing peace over closure, growth over resentment. Yourself without needing permission. You didn't become cold. You became clear. Clear on who deserves access to you. Clear on what drains you. Clear on how sacred your energy really is. They can't climb the walls you've already outgrown. Here's the truth they'll never admit. They want access to the old version of you because they can't handle the strengths of who you've become. You've become too self-aware to be too grounded to be provoked, too focused to be distracted. You're not reactive, you're strategic. You're not soft, you're selective. You're not angry, you're awake. And they don't know how to manipulate someone who no longer needs their approval just to breathe. Final word, you're free. And that's why they panic. You reclaimed your voice. You mastered your mind. You burned the blueprint they once used to control you. They can't pull strings once. You've cut the cord. You've become self-led, self-defined, self-respecting. That's why they're angry. Because the old game no longer works on the new. You, and this time, you're not going back. At first, your silence confused them. They thought it was temporary. They mistook it for weakness. They assumed you'd eventually break, return to explain yourself. But you didn't. You chose. Grounded confidence over reactive words. You chose stillness over conflict. You let your absence do the talking. Your voice no longer needed to speak. And that's when everything shifted. They didn't just hear your silence, they felt it. And it said everything, the loudest statement you'll ever make is the one you don't say out loud. Words can be twisted, dismissed, misunderstood, but silence pierces deeper, especially when it comes from someone who once over-explained, who once justified their presence, who once begged to be understood. Now you say nothing because your growth says it all. You no longer seek validation, you embody self. And that kind of transformation demands a different kind of respect, the kind that never has to be asked for. That is emotional intelligence. When you understand that not every attack deserves a response, you start to see the truth behind it. They didn't want an explanation, they wanted a reaction. They wanted you angry, off balance, reactive. They wanted you to flinch, to defend yourself, to fall apart. But instead of spiraling into their chaos, you offered them something they didn't expect. Emotional discipline. You chose the higher ground. Because not everything is worth your energy. Not everyone is worthy of your explanation. That's the core lesson emotional intelligence teaches us. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all, and in your silence, they finally met a version of you they couldn't manipulate. Silence isn't punishment. It's not revenge. It's not cruelty. Silence is clarity. It's the boundary you draw to protect your peace. You didn't stay quiet to hurt them. You stayed quiet to heal yourself, to hold on to your inner calm, to protect your psychological space, to remind yourself that your time, energy, and presence are sacred, not for public access. And ironically, the same people who once ignored your words now crave to hear them, because nothing forces someone to reflect on their own behavior. Quite like the hollow silence of a connection they used to abuse. Now completely gone. So they act out, they speak louder, they go to extremes, trying anything to pull you back into the storm, but it doesn't work anymore, because you've emotionally outgrown them. You've become a fortress of stillness, and that stillness it turns into a mirror. Now, what they see isn't you, it's themselves. Their guilt, their games, their need-iness. Your silence becomes a truth serum, exposing everything they tried to avoid back when you were still explaining. Your self-respect begins where noise ends. You used to think you had to earn people's respect. That if you explained just one more time, forgave one more time, softened one more time, they'd understand. But no, true respect is not negotiated. It's earned through the standards you set, your detachment, your ability to walk away without bitterness. Now they watch from a distance, and they see someone they can't guilt, can't corner, can't control. Someone who chose silence, not as surrender, but as sovereignty. Final word. Let your stillness be your new standard. You no longer react, because you no longer need to prove anything. You've already proven the most important thing, that you are capable of self-control, that you lead yourself with self-respect, that your foundation is built on spiritual discipline. This is the power of silence, not as avoidance, but as evolution. And now, even those who once disrespected your voice have begun to respect your silence. They wanted war, they wanted competition, they wanted to pull you into a game with no winner, only wounds. But you chose a different path. You didn't win the battle. You outgrew the battlefield. And the moment they looked up and saw you were no longer playing, that's when the real silence began. Because walking away isn't defeat. Walking away is liberation. Emotional intelligence is knowing what's not worth fighting for. In the past, fighting back made you feel powerful, righteous, strong. Until you realized this hard truth. Every time you fight the wrong person, you lose. Even if you win. Because the cost is your energy, your peace, your clarity, and eventually, your identity. Emotional intelligence taught you peace is more valuable than victory. Clarity is better than closure. And freedom, it doesn't come from conquering others. It comes from mastering yourself. You stopped playing the role they cast for you. They once called you too kind, too forgiving, too easy to manipulate. They wrote a script where you had to lose yourself just to prove your heart. But the moment you dropped that script, walked off their stage, you broke the cycle. That's what happens when you finally embrace yourself. You stop needing to win a game that was never yours to begin with. A game built on someone else's dysfunction. You no longer beg for understanding. You no longer explain your exit. You simply walk away with your dignity intact. And that's strength. Because let's be honest, what's the point of winning a war when the war itself should never have been fought? Some battles aren't battles, they're traps. They wear the costume of justice, fairness, closure. But at their core, they're just chaos in disguise. These are the emotional setups where they lie, and you feel the need to defend. They insult, and you try to justify. They disappear, and you chase after them. And if you're not careful, that loop becomes addictive. You get hooked on the drama, on the reaction, on the performance of it all. But not anymore, because now you've awakened. And the moment you realized silence is more powerful than strategy, everything changed. You stopped attending arguments that insulted your intelligence or your growth. You stopped performing in battles where the only reward was exhaustion. You chose peace, and that became the ultimate power move. They expected fire. You gave them calm. They expected tears, drama, and desperate pleas. You gave them distance, and suddenly they didn't know what to do. Why? Because most people have been trained to believe that whoever screams the loudest wins. But you've learned the deeper truth. Stillness is strength. Detachment is dominance. Silence is sovereignty. You're not trying to defeat anyone anymore. You're focused on building yourself. This right here is what a mindset looks like in real life. You found spiritual discipline in the middle of ego warfare. Because the old you would have clapped back, tried to get the last word, tried to prove your value to those who never deserved it. But the evolved you, now you understand. Some enemies aren't defeated by confrontation. They're defeated by becoming untouchable, not unreachable. Untouchable, unfazed, unbothered, emotionally sealed off from their chaos. That is spiritual discipline. It's when your soul finally whispers, not every provocation deserves a reaction. Because peace is too expensive to waste. You're not above them. You're just beyond the game. Let's be clear, you didn't rise to feel superior. You rose because the pain of staying small was unbearable. You didn't cut people off to hurt them. You outgrew the space where their manipulation could survive. And now, they're playing the game alone. They can gossip. They can mock you. They can throw your name into conversations you're no longer part of. But here's the thing. They're talking to themselves now. Because you've stopped showing up. You've stepped into a mindset where success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself what happens when you finally honor your worth. And the final truth, you left the game because you understood the game. And the moment you saw the rules clearly, you realized the only winning move was to stop playing. You refused to let their chaos become your identity. You rejected the narrative of endless retaliation. You traded the battlefield for peace, the echo chamber for truth. This is Stoic power in its purest form. To win without needing victory, to speak without noise, to rise without begging for applause, and to walk away not in anger, but in alignment. You didn't just change the game, you became the one. They can't play anymore. They tried to break you. They mocked you, dismissed your worth, expected you to shrink, to stay small, to stay stuck in the version of yourself they could control. But you didn't disappear, you transformed. Now, your growth is doing what your words never could. It's silencing them. They're not haunted by your anger. They're haunted by your evolution. By one painful truth. They never thought you could rise without them. They believed they were your identity. That if they ghosted you, betrayed you, discarded you, you'd collapse. But instead of breaking, you became stronger, wiser, calmer, clearer. You turned pain into purpose. Every scar became structure. And now, your presence alone is living proof that nothing they did was ever enough to stop you. That's the kind of revenge you never have to announce, because it speaks for itself. Emotional intelligence, the weapon they never saw coming. They braced themselves for a reaction. What they weren't prepared for was your rebirth. Emotional intelligence gave you the clarity to understand their cruelty was never about you. Their need to control, born from inner chaos. And the most powerful shift of all, you detached from the game entirely. You stopped negotiating with disrespect, stopped explaining your worth. You rose far above their level to a place they can't even reach anymore. And that kind of transformation didn't take violence. It took self-mastery. You didn't win by hurting them. You won by healing yourself. Here's where most people get it wrong. They think if you're not retaliating, you're weak. That real revenge has to come with flames and fury. But the highest form of revenge isn't loud. It's silent, disciplined, peaceful. You didn't chase closure. You became closure. You didn't wait for apologies. You reclaimed your power. Now you walked through life, untouched because you've internalized a truth they never wanted you to discover. Your peace is untouchable the moment. It's no longer up for negotiation. They're still trapped in the game, but you're not even playing anymore. While they try to control how others see you, you've built a life rooted in truth. While they whisper your name in bitterness, you've forgotten theirs in peace. You're not angry, you're indifferent. And that psychological boundary, that's the final blow. Not because you wanted to destroy them, but because your healing became the mirror they can't bear to look into. They see in you everything they were too afraid to become. And that's what truly breaks them. You've stepped into a level they'll never access. This level is not for the vengeful, not for the bitter, not for those addicted to chaos. This space, this elevation, is reserved for the emotionally intelligent, the self-respecting, the spiritually grounded. You move differently now. You speak less, but every word lands. You react slower, but deeper, because your presence now carries weight. You're not who they remember. You're not even who you were 6 months ago. And that realization, it terrifies them. Final word. Let them watch in silence. They didn't just lose you, they lost access to the most powerful version of you, the one they never took seriously. And now, as they spiral in regret, you keep rising in stillness. You're done proving. You're becoming. You don't walk into rooms wondering if you belong. You are the room. This is your revenge. And it doesn't scream, it radiates. Your evolution isn't for applause. It isn't for validation. It's for freedom, and the ones who once hurt you, they're now front row spectators to the one thing they never expected, your unstoppable rise. They played their games. They tested your limits. They underestimated the storm that was building in silence. But now, they sit in the ruins of their own manipulation. While you ascend calm, focused, untouchable, and maybe. This was never about revenge at all. It was about revelation. You didn't destroy them. You exposed them simply by refusing to play. Because, as you've seen true, power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, if someone once used your kindness and empathy as a weapon, then this is the reminder you need today. You don't need to fight back. You don't need to play by their rules. You only need to evolve, and that quiet evolution will be your loudest answer. No drama, no revenge. Just forward motion with more clarity, more strength. So if this message resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their silent power, and drop a comment below. What's the biggest lesson you learned when you stopped playing their game? If you're building a resilient mindset, emotional intelligence, and inner peace, hit subscribe and join the Life Through Stoicism community. Because the strongest revenge is not needing one at all.